year 325 AD, an event took place in a small city in what is now northwest Turkey that would shape the beliefs of 2 billion people alive on earth today. A Roman emperor who was not even a baptized Christian sat in a golden throne at the head of a room filled with 318 of the most powerful religious leaders in the known world. Bishops who had survived torture, imprisonment, exile, and near execution for their faith. Men with missing eyes, scarred hands, and broken bodies, the marks of Roman persecution still visible on their flesh. And in that room, over the course of one extraordinary month, decisions were made that still govern what you believe about Jesus Christ, the Trinity, Easter, and the Bible itself. Now, here is the part that should stop you cold. Most Christians have never been told the full story of what happened at Nicaea. And most of what the secular world believes about it is built on myths and historical fiction popularized by a 2003 thriller novel. Today we are going all the way in. The real story, the documented history, the genuine controversies, and the questions that still do not have easy answers. By the end of this video, you will understand one of the most consequential moments in human history, and you will never recite the Nicene Creed the same way again. Here is what we are covering today, and I want to be very upfront about something before we begin. This video is going to challenge things you have probably heard from both directions. We are going to challenge the conspiracy theories, and we are going to challenge the sanitized Sunday school version of Nicaea that pretends nothing controversial happened there. The truth, as always, is more complex and more fascinating than either extreme. We will cover 5 major threads. First, the world before Nicaea. What was Christianity actually like in the 3 centuries before 325 AD? The answer will shock you. Second, the Arian crisis. Who was Arius? What did he actually teach? And why did his ideas nearly split Christianity in two, not just for a decade but for over 50 years? Third, Constantine. Who was this man really? Was he a genuine Christian? What was his actual role at Nicaea? And did he decide Christian theology? Fourth, what was actually decided? The Trinity debate, the Nicene Creed, the Easter dating question we discussed in our last video, what the bishops voted on, and what they absolutely did not vote on. Fifth, the suppressed Gospels question. Did Nicaea choose which books go in the Bible and burn the rest? The Da Vinci Code says yes. The historical record says something very different. We are going to walk through the actual evidence together. This is going to be a deep one. Grab something to drink, get comfortable, and let us go back to 325 AD. To understand why Nicaea mattered so much, you have to understand what Christianity was before Nicaea. And what it was messy. Not in a bad way. In the way that something living and growing and spreading across cultures and languages and continents is always messy. Early Christianity was not one unified thing. It was dozens of communities spread across the Roman Empire and beyond. In Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage, Edessa, Persia, Ethiopia, each with its own leadership structure, its own worship practices, and in some cases its own theological emphases. These communities were connected by their shared belief in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, by their shared scriptures, and by their shared apostolic tradition. But on many specific theological questions, including the exact nature of Christ, there was significant diversity of thought and expression. This is not a conspiracy. This is simply what happens when a new faith spreads rapidly across a vast and diverse world before there is a central governing structure to standardize it. And for 300 years, these communities existed not as a powerful institution but as a persecuted minority. Christians were not building cathedrals in 200 AD. They were meeting in each other's homes. They were worshiping in caves and catacombs. They were being arrested, tortured, thrown to lions, and burned alive for refusing to sacrifice to Roman gods. Then, in 312 AD, everything changed. You probably know the story. Constantine, Roman general and co-emperor, was marching toward Rome for a decisive battle against his rival Maxentius. The night before the battle, according to his own account, and the account of his biographer Eusebius of Caesarea, he saw a vision, a cross of light in the sky, and the words, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign conquer. He went into battle the next day at the Milvian Bridge on October 28, 312 AD. He won. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber River. Constantine became sole emperor of the West, and he attributed his victory to the God of the Christians. In 313 AD he issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity throughout the empire. Overnight, the faith that had been hunted and persecuted for 3 centuries became not only legal but favored. Now, was Constantine a genuine Christian? This is one of the most debated questions in all of church history, and I want to be honest with you about what the evidence actually shows. Constantine did not get baptized until he was on his deathbed in 337 AD, 12 years after Nicaea. In his early reign, he continued to mint coins with the image of the sun god Sol Invictus. He declared Sunday a day of rest in 321 AD, but the language of the decree referred to the venerable day of the sun, not the day of Christ's resurrection. But he also built churches across the empire at his own expense, gave church leaders legal authority, exempted Christian clergy from taxation, and by his own account, considered himself a servant of the Christian God. The most honest assessment is this: Constantine was a complicated man whose faith was genuine but whose Christianity was deeply fused with Roman political pragmatism. He did not separate his role as emperor from his role as what he believed was a divinely appointed guardian of the church, which meant that when the church was in crisis, when a theological controversy threatened to tear apart the institution he had just unified, he was going to intervene decisively. Around the year 318 AD, a popular presbyter, a kind of senior priest, in the city of Alexandria in Egypt began teaching something that had never been systematically articulated before. His name was Arius. Arius was not a lunatic or a charlatan. He was an educated, ascetic, deeply committed Christian leader with a massive following. People loved him. He wrote popular songs to spread his theology, songs that dock workers and sailors and merchants could learn and sing in the streets. His ideas went viral in the ancient world in a way that makes modern social media look slow. And here is what Arius taught. He taught that God the Father is absolutely one, absolutely unique, absolutely beyond all creation. He is eternal and uncreated. And since he is the only eternal uncreated being, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, must have had a beginning. There was a time, Arius said, before the Son existed. The Son was the greatest of all created beings, exalted above every other creature, but he was still a creature. He was not co-eternal with the Father. He was not of the same substance as the Father. He was like the Father, but he was not God in the same sense the Father is God. Arius's famous slogan, which became a rallying cry across the empire, was simple and devastating. There was a time when the Son was not. Now, before you immediately dismiss this as obvious heresy, I need you to feel the weight of the argument as a first-century thinker would have felt it. Arius was not making this up from nothing. He was drawing on deep monotheistic instincts rooted in Jewish theology. The absolute oneness of God was not a trivial concern. And there are New Testament passages that Arius could point to, Jesus saying the Father is greater than I in John 14 verse 28, or Paul describing the Son as the firstborn of all creation in Colossians 1 verse 15, as textual support for his position. His opponents, led most fiercely by Athanasius, a young deacon in Alexandria who would spend his entire life fighting this battle, argued that Arius's teaching destroyed the entire gospel. If Christ was a created being, then he was not truly God. And if he was not truly God, then his death could not truly atone for the sins of all humanity. A created being cannot bear the weight of the infinite debt of human sin. The entire structure of salvation collapses. Athanasius's slogan in response to Arius was equally memorable: what has not been assumed cannot be healed. Meaning, if Christ did not fully assume true divinity, he could not fully heal the breach between God and humanity. This was not an academic debate. This was a fight over the very heart of the gospel. And it was tearing the church apart. In Alexandria, across Egypt, in Palestine, in Syria, in Asia Minor. It was being fought in theological treatises, in street arguments, in competing sermons, in letters sent between bishops across the empire. Constantine heard about it and was frustrated. He did not initially grasp the theological stakes. He wrote a letter to both Alexander of Alexandria and to Arius, calling their dispute a trivial quarrel between academics with too much time on their hands. He was wrong, badly wrong, and his advisor Hosius of Corduba told him so. So Constantine took an unprecedented step. He called a council, not a local council, not a regional synod, a universal council, the first in the history of the Christian Church, inviting bishops from every province of the empire and beyond to come to the city of Nicaea and resolve the crisis together. They came from everywhere. From Egypt, from Palestine, from Syria, from Persia, from Spain, from Gaul, from Britain. Though historians note that British bishops were so poor that Constantine paid their travel expenses. From the east, bishops who had survived Diocletian's great persecution just 20 years earlier. Men who had had their Bibles burned, their fingers removed to prevent them from writing, their eyes gouged out for refusing to sacrifice to Roman gods. The traditional number is 318 bishops, a number the early church saw as symbolic, since 318 is the numerical value of the name Isis, Jesus in Greek. The actual number was probably somewhere between 250 and 300. Notable by his absence, Pope Sylvester I of Rome. He was too old and unwell to make the journey. He sent 2 representatives in his place. Constantine met the arriving bishops with extraordinary ceremony and generosity. He provided their transportation at imperial expense. He housed and fed them in the imperial palace. He greeted them personally, reportedly weeping when he saw the wounds and scars that many still carried from the persecutions. According to Eusebius, who was present, the emperor embraced each bishop, kissed the wounds of those who had suffered for their faith, and begged their blessing. This was a politically masterful gesture, but it was also, by the accounts of those present, a genuinely moving moment. Whatever Constantine's theological sophistication, his reverence for these scarred survivors of persecution appears to have been real. The formal sessions began on June 19, 325 AD, in the Great Hall of the Imperial Palace at Nicaea. When Constantine entered, the entire assembly of bishops rose to their feet. He walked to the golden throne that had been placed for him at the front of the hall, and he waited, standing, until the senior bishop present gave him a signal to be seated. It was a subtle but important gesture. He was the emperor. But this was a gathering of the church. He understood, at least in this moment, that his role was different here. He gave an opening address, in Latin, which was then translated into Greek for the majority of attendees. By all accounts it was brief, warm, and focused on a single theme: unity. He told the bishops that discord in the church was more dangerous to him than any military threat. He urged them to set aside personal rivalries and reach a decision that would restore peace. Then he stepped back. He did not vote. He did not chair the theological debates. He appointed his advisor Hosius of Corduba as chairman, and the bishops began their work. What happened next was not tidy. Arius himself was present at Nicaea, not as a bishop but as a representative of his position. He made his case directly to the assembled council. And here is where one of history's most remarkable and most human moments occurred. According to the hagiographic accounts of St. Nicholas of Myra, yes, that Nicholas, the one whose legend eventually became Santa Claus, the debate grew so heated that at one point Nicholas of Myra walked across the floor of the council and slapped Arius directly in the face. He was immediately reprimanded, his bishop's vestments removed, and he was placed under a kind of house arrest within the palace. According to the tradition, he received a vision that night of Christ and the Virgin Mary, who restored his vestments to him. Whether you accept the miraculous elements of that story or not, it tells you something historically real about the temperature in that room. This was not a polite academic seminar. This was a clash of convictions held with the intensity of people who believed the eternal fate of souls was at stake. The theological debate centered on a single Greek word, homoousios. Homosame. Ousios, substance or being. Homoousios, of the same substance. The question before the council was whether Jesus Christ was homoousios with the Father, of the very same substance, the very same being, co-eternal and co-equal, or whether he was merely homoousios, of similar substance but not identical. I want you to notice something remarkable about this moment. The difference between these two positions, the difference that divided the church for decades and shaped the beliefs of billions of people, was a single letter, one iota, the Greek letter iota. Homoousios versus homoousios, one iota apart, and yet everything was at stake in that one letter. Because homoousios, similar substance, left room for Arius's position that the Son was a different kind of being from the Father, merely like him in some respects, while homoousios, same substance, affirmed that the Son was fully and truly God in the same way and to the same degree as the Father. Now here is something that most people do not know about this debate, and I want to be transparent with you because intellectual honesty matters on this channel. The word homoousios, same substance, does not appear in the Bible, not in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament. It was a term borrowed from Greek philosophy, specifically from Neoplatonism. And several bishops at Nicaea were deeply uncomfortable with using non-biblical philosophical language to define Christian doctrine. One scholar has noted that Constantine himself, who was not a theologian and freely admitted it, pushed hard for the term homoousios because he saw it as a clear, decisive formulation that would end the argument. Whether his theological motivations were pure or his political ones were dominant is, again, one of those genuinely contested historical questions. What we know is this: the council voted, and the result was decisive, but not unanimous. Of the 250 to 300 bishops present, only 2 refused to sign the Nicene Creed. All the others, including several who were known sympathizers with Arius, signed it. Some signed under pressure from the emperor. Some signed because they genuinely agreed. And some signed with their fingers crossed, as it were, knowing they would continue to support Arius afterward. Arius himself refused to sign. He and his 2 remaining supporters were immediately exiled by imperial decree. The council had spoken. Christ was declared to be of the same substance as the Father. Homoousios. The Trinity, in the sense that most Christians understand it today, had been formally articulated and defended for the first time in the history of the Church. The Trinity debate was the central issue, but the council did not end with the Nicene Creed. The bishops spent the remaining weeks of their time together addressing a range of other pressing matters. As we discussed in our Easter video, which you should watch if you haven't, the council addressed the dating of the celebration of Christ's resurrection. They formalized the rule that we still use today, the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. And they deliberately structured this calculation to avoid coinciding with the Jewish Passover. As we covered in detail in that video, this decision had political and anti-Jewish dimensions that should trouble us even while we acknowledge the theological motivations behind it. The council also addressed the Meletian Schism, a division in the Egyptian church over how to handle Christians who had apostatized during the persecution and then sought reinstatement. This was a question of pastoral policy rather than theology, and the council ruled with a degree of mercy that some of the rigorists found too lenient. The council debated clerical celibacy. The rigorists wanted to require it for all clergy. A bishop named Paphnutius, who had himself had one eye removed during the persecution, stood up and argued passionately against imposing celibacy as a universal rule. He argued it would be an unfair burden and would cause pastoral harm. His view prevailed. Clerical celibacy was not mandated at Nicaea. The council also formally defined the relationship between bishops, establishing that the bishops of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch held a kind of honorary primacy among their peers. This was a seed that would eventually grow into the doctrine of papal supremacy, though that was centuries in the future. In total, the council produced 20 formal canons, rules governing church discipline and practice. These 20 canons are documented and survive in full. They deal with practical matters of church governance. None of them, not one, address the question of which books belong in the Bible. Which brings us to the most popular myth about the Council of Nicaea. In 2003, Dan Brown published the Da Vinci Code. It became one of the best-selling novels in history, over 80 million copies sold. And in it, a character named Sir Lee T-Bing makes a claim that has since been repeated millions of times as historical fact. T-Bing says, more than 80 Gospels were considered for the New Testament, and yet only a relative few were chosen for inclusion, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John among them. The Bible as we know it today was collated by the pagan Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. The other Gospels were outlawed, gathered up, and burned. This is one of the most successfully propagated pieces of historical misinformation in modern culture. And I want to walk through it carefully, not to defend Constantine or the institutional church uncritically, but because getting history right matters. Let me be specific about each claim. The Council of Nicaea did not vote on the canon of Scripture. There is not a single primary source document, not a single letter, record, or eyewitness account from anyone who was actually at the council, that describes any discussion of which books should be in the Bible. Eusebius of Caesarea was present at the council and wrote extensively about it. He does not mention any canon discussion. Athanasius was present. He does not mention it. The 20 canons produced by the council, which are fully documented and survive intact, make no reference to any books of Scripture. The myth appears to trace back to a late 9th century Greek manuscript called the Synodicon Vetus, written over 500 years after the council. This manuscript contains a fanciful account of how the canonical books were miraculously separated from the non-canonical ones by divine intervention at Nicaea. It is obviously legendary rather than historical. But this account eventually found its way into the writings of Voltaire in the 18th century, and from there into popular culture. Dan Brown did not invent this myth. He inherited it and amplified it. The Gospel Coalition scholar John Mead put it plainly, there is no historical basis for the idea that Nicaea established the canon and created the Bible. The formation of the New Testament canon was a long, gradual process that began before Nicaea and was not formally completed until the Councils of Hippo in 393 AD and Carthage in 397 AD, 72 years after Nicaea. And even then, the canon lists of respected church fathers continued to vary somewhat on the edges. Brown claims that more than 80 Gospels were considered for the New Testament. This number is simply not supported by history. There were a handful of early Gnostic writings that were called Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Mary, and a few others. Some scholars count around 30 to 40 writings loosely described as Gospels from the early Christian centuries. Not 80. And more critically, these Gnostic texts were never seriously considered for inclusion in the New Testament by the mainstream church. Why? Because by the time most of these texts appeared, the mid-2nd century to the 3rd century, the 4 canonical Gospels were already deeply embedded in Christian worship and practice. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 AD, already treats Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as the 4 authoritative Gospels and argues theologically for why there must be 4 of them. That is 145 years before the Council of Nicaea. The Gnostic Gospels were rejected not because Constantine burned them but because the Church had evaluated them against the standard of apostolic origin and found them wanting. They were written too late by unknown authors, containing theological content that contradicted the earliest apostolic witness. As historian Bart Ehrman, who is himself a skeptic and certainly no defender of the institutional church, has written about Brown's claims, these assertions are completely wrong. The four Gospels were firmly ensconced well before Constantine's conversion, and the other Gospels had already long been proscribed by Christian leaders as heretical productions. They weren't suppressed by Constantine. Perhaps the most dramatic claim in the Da Vinci Code is that before the Council of Nicaea, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great man but not divine, and that Constantine commissioned a vote that essentially upgraded Jesus to God status, with the losing side being suppressed. This claim is not historically defensible, and the evidence against it is overwhelming. Here are early Christian writers, all of them pre-Nicaea, all of them writing before Constantine was even born or while he was still a young man, and what they said about the divinity of Christ. Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 105 AD, explicitly called Jesus, God himself being manifested in human form. Clement of Rome, around 150 AD, wrote that it is fitting to think of Jesus Christ as of God. Justin Martyr, around 160 AD, wrote that the Father of the universe has a Son, and he is even God. Irenaeus, around 180 AD, wrote, "He is God, for the name Emmanuel indicates this." Origen, writing around 225 AD, a full century before Nicaea, wrote extensively about the divine nature of Christ. The belief that Jesus was divine was not invented at Nicaea. It was the consistent testimony of the mainstream church from the very beginning. What Nicaea did was formally articulate and define that belief in philosophical terms, using the word homoousios, in order to refute the Arian position that was challenging it. The vote at Nicaea was not creating a new doctrine. It was defending an old one. Now, having debunked the fictional version of Nicaea, I want to be clear that the real version still has plenty of genuinely troubling elements that deserve honest examination. Constantine did manipulate the outcome. Scholars who have studied the council closely have noted that Constantine appointed his own advisor as chairman, sided with Alexander against Arius from the beginning, used imperial pressure to push the term homoousios even when many bishops were theologically uncomfortable with it, and then exiled the dissenters by imperial decree. This was not a free and open theological debate among equals. It was a church council operating under the shadow of imperial power. The most politically connected position won. Does that mean the theological conclusion was wrong? Not necessarily. The truth of a proposition is not determined by the process by which it was established. Many scholars, including those who are deeply critical of Constantine's methods, still hold that the Nicene formulation accurately reflects the witness of the New Testament and the earliest Christian tradition. But it does mean that when you recite the Nicene Creed, you are reciting something that was hammered out under imperial pressure, with bishops who had survived Roman persecution now serving at the pleasure of a Roman emperor who had not yet been baptized. That complexity deserves to be held with honesty, not hidden. The anti-Jewish dimension of the Easter dating decision, which we covered fully in our last video, also deserves more attention than it typically gets. And the subsequent history of Arianism, which did not die at Nicaea and in fact became the official theology of the Eastern Empire again within a decade, reveals that Nicaea settled the question legally but not theologically. The controversy raged for another 50 years, with Arius being rehabilitated, Athanasius being exiled 5 times, and successive emperors backing different theological positions. The Arian controversy was not resolved until the Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, 56 years after Nicaea. Here is something almost no one tells you about the Council of Nicaea. Within a decade of the council, Constantine reversed himself. He rehabilitated Arius, recalled him from exile, and ordered Athanasius, the great defender of Nicene orthodoxy, to readmit Arius to communion in Alexandria. Athanasius refused. He was exiled. Arius traveled to Constantinople in 336 AD, where he was to be formally reinstated. But the night before his reinstatement ceremony, Arius died suddenly. The circumstances of his death are disputed. His supporters said he was poisoned. His opponents said it was divine judgment. The truth is probably simply that he was very old and very ill, and the stress of the journey and the ceremony was too much. But his death did not end Arianism. Far from it. Eusebius of Nicaea, a closet Arian who had signed the Nicene Creed under pressure, baptized Constantine on his deathbed in 337 AD. Yes, the emperor who convened the Council of Nicaea to defeat Arianism was baptized at the end of his life by an Arian bishop. Constantine's son and successor, Constantius II, was openly Arian. He supported Arian bishops, exiled Nicene bishops, and at one point succeeded in having the term homoousios officially removed from Christian doctrine at the Council of Constantinople in 360 AD, 35 years after Nicaea. Athanasius was exiled 5 times. 5 times he was driven from his see in Alexandria. He spent 17 years total in exile. His contemporaries summarized his situation with a Latin phrase that has echoed through church history: Athanasius contra mundum. Athanasius against the world. And yet, he outlasted them all. He returned from every exile. And in 381 AD, at the Council of Constantinople under Emperor Theodosius I, the Nicene formulation was finally and permanently established as the orthodox position of the Universal Church. It had taken 56 years. But the theology hammered out at Nicaea in 325 AD had survived everything thrown against it. The Nicene Creed, in the form that was finalized at Constantinople in 381 AD, is still recited by Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Christians, Anglicans, Lutherans, Presbyterians, and many other denominations around the world every single week. Literally billions of times. Let me walk through its key theological claims, because each one was forged in the fire of this controversy. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. The God who made everything, visible and invisible, physical and spiritual, is one God, the Father of Jesus Christ. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father before all ages. God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten not made, consubstantial with the Father. Consubstantial. That is the English rendering of homoousios. The word that started it all. The word that one iota of difference could have changed. Jesus is consubstantial with the Father, of the same substance, the same being, the same essence. Not similar. Not subordinate. The same. Through him all things were made. This is the anti-Arian statement. Arius said Jesus was a created being, the first and greatest creature but still a creature. The Creed says, no. He is not part of creation. All creation was made through him. He is on the Creator side of the Creator-creature distinction. For us and for our salvation he came down from heaven, and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and became man. For our sake he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, he suffered death and was buried, and rose again on the 3rd day in accordance with the Scriptures. Every word here is load-bearing. The reference to Pontius Pilate anchors the gospel in history. It happened at a specific time, under a specific Roman governor, in a specific place. This is not myth. This is historical claim. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. And we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, who with the Father and the Son is adored and glorified, who has spoken through the prophets. This section, addressing the Holy Spirit, was developed more fully at Constantinople in 381 than at Nicaea in 325. The full doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, 3 persons, one God, was the work of both councils together. And we believe in one holy, Catholic and Apostolic Church. Catholic here does not mean Roman Catholic. It means universal, the Greek word katholikos, meaning whole or complete. The Creed was written long before the East-West Schism of 1054 that created the modern Catholic and Orthodox churches. I want to step back from the historical details for a moment and talk about why any of this matters for you today. Because the question at the heart of the Arian controversy is not a dead question. It is one of the most alive questions in all of religious thought. Who is Jesus? Not as an academic exercise, not as a historical puzzle, but as the question on which everything else depends. If Arius was right, if Jesus was the greatest of all created beings, supremely exalted but ultimately a creature, then what happened on the cross was the martyrdom of the most faithful man who ever lived. Inspiring, noble, worth remembering, but not cosmically sufficient to reconcile all of humanity to an infinite God. If Athanasius was right, if Jesus was truly and fully God, homoousios with the Father, the eternal Son taking on human flesh, then what happened on the cross was something categorically different. It was God himself bearing the full weight of human sin and failure. It was infinite love absorbing infinite judgment. It was the Creator entering creation to fix what creation could not fix itself. That distinction is not a theological technicality. It is the difference between a religion that inspires human effort and a faith that announces divine rescue. The bishops who gathered at Nicaea, scarred and broken by persecution, exiled and tortured for their faith, understood instinctively what was at stake. They were not fighting over philosophical word games. They were defending the only thing that had given them the courage to face lions and fire and exile with joy. The reality that God himself had come. That God himself had suffered, that God himself had died, and that God himself had walked out of the grave. I also want to address directly why the myths about Nicaea are more than just historical errors. When people believe that Constantine invented the divinity of Christ at Nicaea, when they believe that the Bible was compiled and edited by a pagan emperor for political purposes, the effect is to undermine the credibility of the entire Christian faith. And because that claim sounds sophisticated and conspiratorial and anti-establishment, it spreads extremely effectively in our culture. But it is based on fiction. Specifically on a 2003 thriller novel, a 9th century legendary manuscript, and the writings of Voltaire. The historical record is actually much more interesting and much more defensible than the conspiracy theory version. The divinity of Christ was not invented at Nicaea. It was the consistent, documented, early testimony of the Christian movement from the very beginning, testified to by people who were being killed for saying it. The New Testament canon was not chosen by Constantine. It was recognized gradually by communities of faith over 3 centuries. And the suppressed Gospels were not suppressed by any council. They were rejected by the early church on the grounds that they were written too late, by unknown authors, and contained theological content that contradicted the earliest apostolic witness. This does not mean you must accept every decision made at Nicaea uncritically. The political pressure Constantine applied, the anti-Jewish dimensions of the Easter dating decision, the coercive use of imperial exile against theological dissenters. These are real problems that deserve honest examination. But examining them honestly requires knowing what actually happened. Not what Dan Brown says happened. No. I always try to present the strongest version of the opposing argument on this channel. And on the question of Nicaea, there are legitimate critical arguments that deserve honest engagement. Argument 1. Even if Nicaea did not invent the doctrine of Christ's divinity, it did cement that doctrine as mandatory orthodoxy enforced by imperial power. Before Nicaea, holding minority Christological views was a matter of theological debate. After Nicaea, it could get you exiled by the emperor. This is a genuine problem, the fusion of theological authority with imperial coercive power, and it set a precedent that the church would pay for in blood for centuries. Argument 2. The term homoousios was not a biblical term. It was borrowed from Greek philosophy. The decision to use non-scriptural philosophical language to define the nature of God represented a significant Hellenization of Christian theology. Some theologians, including some who fully affirmed the Nicene conclusions, believe this introduced philosophical frameworks that have distorted Christian thinking in ways we are still working through today. Argument 3. The process was not democratic or representative in the way we might hope. Constantine's thumb was on the scale. The bishops who were uncomfortable with homoousios largely signed anyway, not because they were convinced but because they understood the imperial consequences of not signing. The history of the first decade after Nicaea, where the Arian position rapidly reasserted itself as emperors changed, shows that the consensus achieved at Nicaea was more fragile and more politically contingent than the official narrative suggests. These are real arguments, made by real scholars, and they deserve engagement rather than dismissal. What I would say in response is this: the process was imperfect. The political pressures were real. The philosophical language chosen was contested. And yet, the theological conclusion that Jesus Christ is truly God, homoousios with the Father, finds robust support in the New Testament documents themselves, in the writings of the earliest church fathers, and in the lived experience of billions of Christians across 20 centuries. The road to Nicaea was rocky, but the destination it reached is not merely a political construction. Let me do what we always do on this channel, go back to the text. Because the most important thing about the Council of Nicaea is not what the bishops said. It is whether what they said aligns with what Jesus said, and what the apostles recorded. In John 1 verse 1, the opening of the Gospel of John, we read, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." 3 distinct statements in one sentence. The Word, which John's entire Gospel identifies as Jesus, existed before the beginning. The Word was in relationship with God, distinct from the Father. And the Word was God. In John 8 verse 58, Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am." The phrase I am, ego eimi in Greek, is the divine self-identification of God in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, where it translates the Hebrew YHWH, the sacred name of God. When Jesus uses this phrase about himself, the crowd immediately picks up stones to kill him, for blasphemy, for claiming to be God. They understood what he was saying. In John 10 verse 30, Jesus says, "I and the Father are one." The Greek word for one here is hen, one thing, one substance, not haze, which would mean one person. He is not claiming identity with the Father. He is claiming oneness of substance, which is exactly what homoousios means. In Colossians 1 verses 15 to 17, Paul writes of Christ, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Arians used the phrase firstborn of all creation to argue that Christ was the first created being. But Paul is not saying Christ was the first creature. He is saying Christ holds the rights and authority of the firstborn, the preeminent position over all creation, precisely because he is not part of creation but the one through whom all creation came. In Hebrews 1 verse 3 we read, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being." And in Philippians 2 verse 6, Paul writes that Christ, who was in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant. The consistent witness of the New Testament, written by eyewitnesses and their immediate disciples, completed by the end of the 1st century, a full 2 centuries before Constantine, is that Jesus Christ is fully divine. Nicaea did not invent this. It formalized the language for it. There is a significant difference. We have covered a lot of ground today. Ancient Alexandria and the rise of Arius. A Roman emperor who wept over the wounds of persecuted bishops. A council hall where a bishop slapped a heretic. A one-letter Greek word that split the church for 50 years. A creed that has been recited billions of times across 20 centuries. But I want to bring it back to what actually matters. The question Arius raised in 318 AD is the same question that every human being who has ever lived must eventually answer. Who is Jesus? If he was the greatest creature, supremely exalted, supremely wise, supremely holy, then his death on the cross was the most admirable sacrifice in human history. But it could not bear the infinite weight of human sin. It was not enough. If he was truly God, if the eternal Son of God, through whom all things were made, genuinely took on human flesh and genuinely died and genuinely walked out of a grave 3 days later, then that changes absolutely everything. It means the universe is not indifferent. It means the Creator entered creation for love of what he created. It means death is not the end. It means there is forgiveness and redemption and hope, not as wishful thinking but as accomplished fact. Athanasius spent 17 years in exile defending that claim. The bishops at Nicaea, men with missing eyes and scarred hands who had suffered for their faith, staked their lives on that claim long before they ever signed the Nicene Creed. They did not decide it at Nicaea. They confirmed what they had always believed, what the apostles had always taught, what Jesus himself had always claimed. If you made it to this point in the video, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. You are not afraid of history. You are not threatened by complexity. You want to know what is actually true even when it complicates things. I have one question for you in the comments, and I genuinely want to know. After everything we covered today, the real history of Nicaea, the Arian controversy, Constantine's role, the suppressed Gospels myth, has your view of the Council of Nicaea changed? And if so, in which direction? Did you come in believing the Da Vinci Code version and leave with more respect for the historical record? Or did you come in with a sanitized Sunday school version and leave with more appreciation for the genuine complexity? I want to know where you landed. If this video helped you understand something you did not understand before, share it with someone who needs to have this conversation. A pastor, a skeptic friend, a family member who read the Da Vinci Code and never got the other side. And if you have not watched our Easter video, which covers the Passover origins of Easter, Constantine's calendar manipulation, and the pagan symbols question, that is linked right here. The two videos go together. They are the same story told from different angles. Thank you for spending this time with me. The truth does not need to be hidden. And the God who stood behind the bishops at Nicaea, scarred and broken and exiled as they were, is the same God who is standing behind you now. He is risen. He is Lord. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against his church. God bless you. I will see you in the next one.